So, thank you, Christian. And indeed, I would like to begin by thanking Christian Ney for organizing this conference and gathering us here to discuss timely and nagging question, what is to be done in the field of East Central European art history, or maybe even what is to be done with the field itself. I'm also happy and honored to be part of the conference programming committee, together with Pavlina Morganova, Żuna Laszlo, and Christian himself. As you might have already noticed, and as Christian has already said, each member of the committee is delivering their papers as introductions to one of the thematic panels. As my talk regards not only the so-called official culture of socialism, but it above all addresses some general issues that should stay with us during the whole meeting, it is my pleasure to open the first panel. My presentation will consist of two parts. Part 1. Agenda before methodologies. A compass of East Central European art history. The title of our conference invites us to think, discuss, propose, and maybe even decide on what should be done next in terms of art historical research methodologies in our region. This is what we will be debating about for 2 days. However, before we start discussing that, it might be useful to introduce and give a thought to a distinction between methodologies as tools and agendas as their goals. Logically speaking, an agenda is what comes before a methodology. It is what precedes it as its existential, practical, and political grounding, and what provides it with an aim, an end to a means, a goal to achieve, directing its usage and shaping its effects and meanings. The very word agenda seems apt for the question, what is to be done, posed in the conference title. It comes from the Latin agendum, which means something to be done, and it has kept this literal meaning in English, where it can refer to a list of things to be considered and done. But agenda also refers to what drives and motivates somebody, to a reason for doing something, a set of desired future practical achievements, to an underlying ideological plan or program, often secret, as in the phrase a hidden agenda. We could, therefore, ask ourselves, what is our agenda? What drives us? What do we want? What does East Central European art history want? As some of you know, the last sentence is also the title of Edith Andra's important article, in which she critically reassesses the legacy of Piotr Piotrowski's horizontal art history as a regionalist and particularist project, and at the same time, she advocates what I think could be accurate to describe as a new universalist agenda. So, we might rephrase our question, what is to be done, and ask ourselves, what is the agenda of East Central European art history? Or in the plural, what are its agendas? What agendas do we already have, and what new agendas do we need? Let me propose, at the beginning of our conference, as a kind of warm-up exercise, an exercise in teaching ourselves how to think in terms of agendas. East Central European art history has always been about space and location. So when I started to think about its agendas and kept noting them down one after another, as if in a process of automatic writing, I ended up with a sort of spaced out configuration of various terms. It looked like a chart, and I thought it would be interesting to preserve art historical evidence in the form close to an actual chart. When I tried to sketch one, its form reminded me, in turn, of a popular social media device called the political compass. It rates your social, economic, and political ideology and locates your position in a spectrum defined by two axes. One is about economic policy, left to right, and the other one about social policy, authoritarian to liberal. This is how I arrived at the idea of a compass of East Central European art history. Nevertheless, it is different from the political compass in some important respects. Its focus is not only on politics, and there are more than 2 axes in it. As you can also see, and let me show it to you. The chart itself is not drawn symmetrically. It looks tilted, and the bubbles with terms do not seem to form a systemic whole, but rather a loose configuration, a flexible assemblage of related elements. The terms in the bubbles may be called directing agendas. Some of them seem political, others are philosophical, and still others come from contemporary sciences. They may form, as in the picture, with their respective, they may form axes, and within their respective pairs, as you can also see, the chart itself is not drawn symmetrically. It looks tilted, and the bubbles with terms do not seem to form a systematic whole, but rather a loose configuration, a flexible assemblage of related elements. The terms in the bubbles may be called directing agendas. Some of them seem political, others philosophical, and still others come from contemporary sciences. They may form axes, and within their respective pairs, become extremes of an opposition, and yet there are also cases in which they can turn into each other or combine with each other. These directing agendas create a frame a spectrum in which more concrete agendas, let's call them thematic agendas, are to be located. And this is a possible list. It's open, and we could add some more of those concrete thematic agendas. Here are just a couple of categories which can be assembled to characterize thematic agendas of individual research positions. When a thematic agenda is moving within the spectrum and nearing a particular directing agenda, it changes its features and meanings accordingly. For example, someone's agenda can be labeled, but it will be a completely different issue when it is determined by neoliberal globalism than when it is closer to socialist imperative. The same goes for the agenda of things, depending on whether it is nearing anthropocentrism or the planetary, and so on and so forth. Now that we know the rules of the game, and keep in mind that the locating process is just an approximation, and it is not based on any kind of quantitative data and algorithmic processing, we can try to chart the agenda, or rather an assemblage of agendas, that define the position of an individual researcher. So let's take, once again, as always, the example of Piotr Piotrowski's horizontal art history as one of the starting points and founding perspectives of East Central European art history after 1945. Taking into consideration his implicit views, presented in the trilogy of books on the region, In the Shadow of Yalta, Art and Democracy in Post-Communist Europe, and A Global Approach to the Art of Eastern Europe, which is still awaiting its English language premiere, we could describe his main agenda, more or less accurately, as geocultural justice and equality. Within a broader assemblage, it could also be linked to a couple of other agendas, such as post-colonialism, identity, solidarity, feminism, and connectivity, even though some of these connections were complex, problematic, or polemical. As regards the directing agendas, which were important to Piotrowski, we could mark the configuration which includes anti-communism, as what drove Piotrowski in his approach to and his judgment on the period of state socialism, particularism, as explicitly expressed in his critical analysis of Western universalism and in his vision of the world as a play of particular cultures without a universalist dimension, then anthropocentrism, which found its expression in the fact that he was not really interested in any kind of post-humanist approach to non-human subjects or the agency of things. Then neoliberal globalism and multiculturalism as what was often nominally criticized by Piotrowski, but what in fact formed according to Jelena Vesic's convincing argument in the text Annual Summit for Non-Aligned Art Historians, a condition of and a demand for the emergence of regionalist identities and projects like horizontal art history. And finally, relational singularity, because Piotrowski was interested in transnational connections, transfers, and circulations. As a result, we could locate his horizontal art history as a practice driven by the demand for geocultural justice and equality somewhere over here. Let's take another example. This time, I would be more interested in an ongoing shift within the spectrum, a relocation which may be indicating a certain more general tendency in our research field. For this, I have selected our colleague Agata Jakubowska and her recent book on Polish artist Maria Pinińska-Bereś, which is subtitled in English translation, Art and Emancipation of Women in Socialist Poland. The fact that Jakubowska is a former student of Piotr Piotrowski can also shed some light on a generational change in the research field. In her earlier books and articles, Jakubowska practiced a feminist art history based on the Western liberal concept of feminism. This concept was a commonplace among Polish feminists after 1989, as they were following and sharing a general anti-communist sentiment and actively forgetting about their local activist and epistemic traditions from the period of state socialism. In the above-mentioned book, in the book that you can see in the picture, Jakubowska confesses that she was one of these feminists. Coming to terms with her earlier professional self, she also points out a decisive influence of Piotrowski and an anti-communist ethos which was dominating the academic circle around him. She writes that this ethos shaped her research perspective in an important way, as it demanded a critical judgment and negative evaluation of the politics of Polish socialist authorities and state institutions, and it also excluded for her, for many years, the possibility of a positive approach to any of those official authorities or institutions' activities. In the book I am discussing, Jakubowska finally departs from the Western concept of feminism as a general analytical perspective and turns instead to the historical process and concept of emancipation of women as part of socialist modernization in Poland. She even drops the very word feminism as the main term of reference, because Western feminist ideas and movements played only a small part in the 1970s. Yes, it started there. In the process, she tries to reconstruct and interpret. Taking all into account, this is how we chart the relocation and transformation of Agata Jakubowska's main research agenda from feminist art history, which was kind of assemblage of some other agendas as well, and you can see how probably we could chart them, to the history of art and emancipation of women, as well as a significant reconfiguration of an assemblage of related agendas. So this is what her position and perspective was before, in an early stage of her career, and this is how she sees her position now and how she describes it herself. So finally, judging by this and many other examples I cannot discuss here, I'm tempted to indicate a more general agenda shift and a displacement of the whole field of East Central European art history after 1945. This is not a game of, picking sticks. It is both what has already been going on for some time and what I would be strongly advocating as the right direction to take now and in the near future. In other words, this would be my general answer to the question, what is to be done? As you can see, we have been moving away from the half of the spectrum determined by neoliberal globalism and multiculturalism, anti-communism, anthropocentrism, and different forms or scale of particularism. We have been moving towards different configurations of universalism, the planetary, the socialist imperative, and a relational singularity, sometimes also called a relational collectivism or a multitude. What is more, the arrows in the chart, as you can see, go beyond the spectrum and point to where completely new and unheard of directing agendas might occur. I can only indicate where they should be sought for, because I think that such new agendas cannot be simply made, produced, or constructed. They should rather emerge, come in the form of an event or experience. And the second thought, potential histories of art and modernization are under socialism. In this part of my introduction, I would like to share with you some sketchy thoughts on a challenge my research has posed for me and the solution I'm trying to come up with. If I were to indicate an agenda which has been driving me for some time, it would be art and modernization under socialism. It is linked to geocultural justice and equality, solidarity, translocal and transnational connectivity, to questions of artistic labor and labor in general, and probably also to the class in the context of modernization as social advancement, to things considered mostly as human artifacts, but also as non-human agencies, and to decoloniality, considered in terms of uncovering local epistemic traditions. What I am calling art and modernization, written with the ampersand sign representing the conjunction A, as in art and science, refers both to socialist modernization of modernizations of artistic culture and to art practices as part of wider processes of social and cultural modernization. For over a year now, I've been doing an intensive research in Polish state archives and focusing on documents of art institutions and administration, mainly from between late 1960s to mid-late 1980s. I've been interested in all dimensions of artistic culture: art production, distribution, exhibition, reception, education, marketing, labor unions, artists' fees and pensions, artistic technologies and materials, or the lack of them. So there are many challenges connected to this kind of enterprise. I have to be dealing with large archival fonts which are not well organized, described, and of course not digitized. And these are typical problems that we all know. If I am interested in socialist modernizations, I must also be trying to read the documents against the grain in order to approach them otherwise than as plain and simple testimonies to oppressions and incapacities of the communist regime. And it is in this context that I've been finding numerous traces of what might be best described as potentialities. These traces may be minutes of the discussion, pieces of commissioned research and expertise, reports and diagnosis, analysis and prognosis, projects, plans, programs, lists of things to be done, ideas and visions which have never been implemented or have only been realized partially. It might be said that they all have actually happened, but only in the form of potentialities. They include projects of humanization of urban space, protection of natural and visual environment, modernized art institutions with computerized documentation centers, socialist art market, social insurance and pensions for artists, or long-term prognosis of development of culture and social life. This dimension of potentiality should definitely be included in historiographical accounts of socialist peripheral or semi-peripheral modernizations as their co-defining feature. This would be the task for their potential histories. In recent years, this concept has been mainly associated with Ariella Azoulay and her anti-imperial post-colonial perspective, which is that of Global South. We know that such post-colonial methods cannot be applied automatically to historical contexts and histories of East Central Europe, So, potential histories of art and modernization under socialism must be kept at a certain distance from what Azoulay proposes, and they must proceed otherwise. But there are certain features they might share with what she says in her analysis. She claims that potentialities are unrealized possible practice and existence scenarios which are kept in archives and other institutions as what should be considered irreversibly past, obsolete, ruined, and buried. Given that potential histories of art and modernization under socialism are supposed to do at least two things. One has been already mentioned, and it is to recover and reconstruct such potentialities in order to include them as an essential aspect into an expanded account of the past. The other thing is that, as Azoulay stresses, potential histories should not be just, and I quote her, giving voice to a silenced past and making the invisible visible, but releasing the past from its pastness. End of quote. The potentialities they recover and rescue should not be treated as irrelevant to the present and future, but as scenarios which are still vital and which can be reinvented. They can be reused, if only as an imperative, an inspiration, a reference point, or a valuable local tradition which legitimizes what we think should be done now. Thank you very much.